Tonight, a look at the ever-changing definition of terrorism. For years, since 9/11, we have been told to worry about Muslim extremists who are waiting to strike both abroad and here at home. And no doubt that risk is still there.
But increasingly, those on the front line of the war on terror are warning about new players with new motives and telling us the old rules don't apply anymore. They also say don't take your safety for granted, especially right here in the Midwest.
5 years ago this month, we first told you about the terrorism recruitment pipeline running from the Twin Cities to Somalia, involving the terror group Al-Shabaab, an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. Back then, FBI agent E.K. Wilson warned us of the risk of terror attack here at home.
Yes, it is happening in our backyard.
5 years later, E.K. Wilson is just as adamant.
It's a dangerous mindset to think that those types of things only happen in the big cities. It could happen anywhere.
But the terrorism focus among law enforcement is changing. It's not just those looking to be tied to a terror group that are being watched. In growing numbers, the FBI is looking for lone wolves, those who may plan violence but aren't tied to a specific ethnicity or religion or ideology. What they do have is a grudge, a desire for weapons, and a willingness to carry out violence.
Some incident or some cause in their life that has either upset them, drawn their interest, upset them enough to motivate them in that direction.
In Pierre, as state lawmakers discuss Medicaid expansion and teacher pay, the folks inside this building have another topic in mind: protecting South Dakota and fighting the belief that if we live here, we have nothing to worry about.
Granted, this isn't the East Coast or the West Coast where you have mass population centers, but that doesn't mean that the state should be considered self-immune from any terrorist-related activity.
This is Steve Pluta, South Dakota's Director of Homeland Security, and if you're not worried about terrorism within our borders, he says you should be. Twice in the last 5 months, once in Lawrence County, the other in Gregory County, investigators have worked cases where people have the parts to make improvised explosive devices, bombs. In both cases, it was men with no known ties to terror groups. And in both cases, Pluta was left with this question.
And what was he planning to doing with those items?
Pluta worked with federal Homeland Security officials this last August for the 75th Sturgis rally, knowing it could be a mass casualty target. But he quickly adds, it doesn't have to be a mass casualty event to strike fear in our hearts and make us think twice about our safety.
You take a look at what happened at Lenox last year, you take a look at the Harrisburg school shooting.
The definition of terror is changing. It's not just terror groups anymore. It's also about the person who, under pressure, makes the wrong decision and snaps. People who feel what happens in their world has to go exactly their way or else.
We are at a point now in this country where people are opting for the or else.
Matt McNeil is a United States Army veteran whose work included weapons training. He is also a radio host at KTNF in Minneapolis and tells me whether we realized it or not, the world changed last November when Paris was attacked by terrorists who killed people simply because they were nearby.
That was god-awful. And you know, the thought is that I think it's only a matter of time, really, before that does happen here. Whether that happens in Minneapolis or Sioux Falls, or happens in Atlanta, Los Angeles, New York, something like that's eventually going to happen, because that's the world that we live in today, and I just don't know how in the world you stop it.
And unfortunately, I've run across some people who say, well, this is South Dakota, and really, what interest or what potential target would it serve for terrorists?
South Dakota Homeland Security Director Steve Pluta speaks all across the state and asks everyone he meets to begin thinking of this as a serious risk. In 1995, Timothy McVeigh bombed the Oklahoma City Federal Building. At trial, McVeigh said he planned the bombing as a protest against the federal government, and that he chose a target in the Midwest because it would have more impact. People wouldn't expect it. Also at trial, it was revealed that one of McVeigh's alternate targets was the federal courthouse in Sioux Falls for the exact same reason. No one would have expected it to happen here. And if you still need convincing the threat is real, this is what FBI Special Agent E.K. Wilson told me when I asked him if the agency has any active terror investigations in South Dakota.
We have investigators assigned to both states, to South Dakota. We have Joint Terrorism Task Force agents and officers assigned, and we have investigations and leads that are ongoing on a regular basis.
Now, both the FBI and South Dakota Homeland Security say they are not trying to scare anyone. They just want people to realize the risk is real and say something if you see something that just doesn't seem right. They say it's better to say something and be wrong than say nothing and have something happen.